know your name, I swear I do. It's on the tip of my tongue. Sorry, what did you say? And I've known you for how long? Your face is so familiar, but no name comes to mind. Please, can you remind me if you'll be so kind? Staring out into space, asking God to hear my case. Trying to think of all things past. How long will my memory last?
Well, hi, everyone, and welcome to Alzheimer Speaks Radio. This is your host, Lori LeBay, and founder of Alzheimer Speaks. Today we're going to have a fantastic show, and I cannot wait to get into our conversation with Liz O'Donnell about how to make caregiving less disruptive, because Lord knows we all need that. But before I introduce her, everybody, we're always getting new listeners, so I always just like to tell people a little bit about Alzheimer Speaks, who we are and what we do. Bottom line, Alzheimer Speaks is an advocacy-based company providing multiple platforms and is recognized as a media outlet that helps shift our dementia care from crisis to comfort around the world. We truly believe that by joining forces and sharing knowledge and having these everyday conversations about living with dementia and caring for others, that we're going to be able to help remove the stigmas attached to memory loss and help people continue to live active and fulfilled lives. At our core, we also believe that the only way we're going to win this battle is to collaborate. And I know that that's working thanks to all of you. You see, your likes, your clicks, and your shares have gotten us recognized as the number one influencer online for Alzheimer's, according to ShareCare and Dr. Oz, and also recognized by Maria Shriver as an architect of change. And that would not have happened if you all weren't helping spread the word of our work. And one of the things that I love so much about my job, and that my mom taught me on our 30-year journey together with her dementia, was that none of us has all the answers, and it truly is about raising everyone's voice. And so at our core, that's what we try to do, is to give you as much information and knowledge from different angles and different aspects of life, so that you can incorporate and choose to try different tools that are available to you. Tools and attitudes make such a huge, huge impact in moving forward. I also want to let you know that, again, we talk to everybody. So maybe you listening might be our next guest. So don't be shy about reaching out to me. We interview people that are living with dementia. We interview family members who are caring for somebody, business professionals, authors, directors, musicians and songwriters, researchers, advocates. It really makes no difference. We all have opinions. We all have great insights, and we need to share them. And that's what Alzheimer Speaks is here to do. I also want to just let you know that we've got only about a week left before our cruise closes out. We are going to the Bahamas. I'm really excited about hitting the Caribbean November 11th through the 18th, and that is going to be for people with early to mid dementia and their care partners. And we've got a great group assembled and a wonderful team for our symposium. We have Harry Urban, Michael Ellenbogen, Lori Shear, and Mary Reed, who are all living with the disease. And then we have Becky Watson, who's a music therapist, and Cindy Lazinski, who heads up a dementia-friendly community in Colorado. And I am so proud of all of our sponsors who have stepped up to help with this. American Senior Magazine, if you haven't checked them out, please do so. John Hopkins has donated some books for us, The 36-Hour Day and a Loving Approach to Dementia Care. And we also have some other books that will be available to people, some art kits, calendar cards, footprint IDs. So it'll be fun and, again, very, I think, educational. Now, let me go ahead and introduce our guest today. We are so lucky and very excited to have Liz O'Donnell with us. She is the author, and I love this title, Mogul Mom and Maid, The Balancing Act of the Modern Woman. And I think this is just such a cool book. It really picks up where other business books have left off, understanding the impact of women's personal lives as on their careers as they care for others. She has a great website called theworkingdaughter.com, just workingdaughter.com, that supports women who are balancing caring for aging parents or others and still have careers. And she's also the founder of Rent a Sister, which is a company that provides support services for family caregivers. So welcome, Liz. I'm thrilled to have you on the show today.
Thank you for having me.
Well, I always like to start out asking if you have personally been touched, by family or friends or maybe coworkers who might have had dementia.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, my father actually just passed away in July, so just a few months ago. He was diagnosed 3 years ago with early stage Alzheimer's and dementia. And at the time, I had a hard time accepting the diagnosis because he also had a urinary tract infection at the time. So it was hard to sort of suss out what was the infection and what was the disease. Plus, I think it's a disease we're probably just naturally inclined to resist hearing about, right? So I originally moved him into a memory care facility just right up the street from me, and then was able to advocate to move him into the assisted living. As the infection cleared and the symptoms declined, lessened, he said, "Why am I locked up in here?" So it was a real win at the time to be, the facility said to me, they had both assisted living and memory care, and they said no one ever moves from the right side to the left side. They always go, eventually from the left side, the assisted living, to more care. So he was the first, but the staff was wonderful, and they worked with me. And he lived there for 3 years, as I mentioned, and then unfortunately in March of this year, despite my having a really strong no hospital policy for him, he was 90, but he got an infection that I just couldn't not treat at the hospital, and that just sparked a progression, right? He got delirium in the hospital. He went into a rehab. He, unfortunately, you talk about stigma. My father was an aggressive dementia case, so he tried to break out and, ended up in a psych ward, and from there things just spiraled quickly.
Oh, geez. I'm so sorry to hear that. It's, no matter how much time you have, it's a difficult journey. I had my mom for 30 years, and people go, oh, my gosh, that's so long. But, there were a lot of blessings wrapped in that time, too, and a closeness that just heightened for us. And so, again, everybody's journey is a little different, and I appreciate you sharing with our audience and myself your personal journey or a bit of it, anyways. Can you tell us, how do you care-proof, your career? That is such a worry for so many people. How do I do both and not jeopardize my career?
Well, it's a valid concern for many people because, we do see the research that shows that there's a stigma attached to that as well, that especially elder care providers often have a tougher time at work even than working parents. And we hear so much about working parents and what kind of support they need and that it's the right thing to do to support them. My experience anyway, and that's why I'm grateful for programs like yours, is that no one was talking about elder care when I started. You just sort of suffered alone. And unlike parenting, at least of a healthy child anyway, there is no planning for elder care. When you have a child, and that's what I wrote about in my book, you have some sense of, when they need well checks and when they start daycare and when they'll go to half-day kindergarten and then to full day. And you can kind of plan your life around that. But with elder care, as you know, the phone rings one day and all of a sudden you are just in it. So really valid concern for people. And my hard-earned one counsel is to act as your parents get older, to almost act as if you're about to go on a maternity leave at any given point. You know, when I was leaving for maternity leave, I started a spreadsheet that I kept on my hard drive, so anybody, and also on the server, so any of my teammates could access it if, you know, I happened to go out early. And it included all of the passwords, all of the action items for all of my clients, anything somebody might need so they could fill in for me at any given time. And with elder care, you know, I can't say that I was organized when I got the first emergency phone call, but I quickly got organized because I realized that I never knew week to week, even day to day, what my schedule was going to be like, where I needed to be. It was super important for me to be with my parents. I knew what was most important in life, which was, you know, that relationship, a clean ending, all things, you know, nothing left unspoken, to be there to be an advocate. But I still had to earn a living. I couldn't lose my job.
Mm-hmm. Well, and that's good planning. I didn't even plan that good when I was pregnant. I remember writing in the bathroom on a brown napkin, you know, paper towel, what everyone had to do, you know, and it was like, boy, that would have been easier if I would have had your list and been prepared when my water broke, you know,
yeah, exactly.
Because I just literally, I was just overwhelmed in trying to rack my brain with what needs to be done now. And that pressure is crazy, you know, when we do that to ourselves. It just is it's so silly when we can prepare and we don't have to put ourselves in that type of position. So I think that's.
Sorry to cut you off. Yeah, I was going to say, and we both know when it comes to caregiving and crises especially, you know, we're not thinking at our best. There are so many truly life or death situations, and we're getting out the door, we're getting to the hospital, we're finding the paperwork, where, you know, all of those things are running through our head. So as much as we can have planned ahead, I mean, I think having the paperwork for your parents handy is also another really important step, so that's one less thing you have to think about. I know there are apps, but I'm more of a paper-based person when it comes to certain things. I kept a packet with a copy of, you know, the advance directives, the medication list, the insurance information at work, in my car, and also in my home office, so that if the call did come, one less thing to think about, I could run out the door and grab it. And then the other thing I would say about, you know, caregiving proof your career to the extent anybody really can is, you know, to make sure that you're as clean at work when you can be in the early days, meaning, you know, you earn equity in your reputation, in you know, how well you show up at work. And those early years of, you know, leaning in, you know, we've heard a lot about leaning in the last few years from Sheryl Sandberg, and I know people have different opinions about leaning in or not leaning in, but I feel like especially for women whose careers get interrupted several times, the more we can lean in and build that reputation equity, the more we can lean on that later when we need it, and we will need it.
Oh, that's a really good point. That is a really good point. And I think it's something that is very overlooked by many. And, you know, we're all going to need help at one time or another. So that's a great philosophy. You know, you had talked about, you know, kind of setting your mindset that, you know, you're pregnant and, you know, that can happen anytime. How do you frame it for men at all? Because, you know, more men are stepping into this now, too, because they don't know what it's like to be pregnant and just called off. Do you have any?
Do you have any
advice for them
about being pregnant? Absolutely. I mean, I think you raise a really good point, which is that we need to be aware of the fact, and we should be having these conversations, that family crises, family issues, elder care, caregiving in general, are very different for men and women. I mean, if you look at the statistics, we see that it is 40% of men who make up the caregivers right now. I mean, it's still majority women, and I think one of the issues for women too is that the expectation is that it's women, and so there are pros and cons to that, right? The pro to that is that women have language around this. Women are talking about what it's like to balance career and family. We're talking about the challenges and the unfairness and how to plan, and conversations like you and I are having right now. The con is that we often do take a reputational hit career-wise because, we might be mommy tracked, and then later we take time off again for elder care, and that adds up. So pros and cons there. And I think, same thing for men. The pros for men is that oftentimes men are rewarded, right, for stepping up to take care of their family. What a great guy. He's the kind of person I want on my team. Look how he prioritizes his family. And the women are like, I've been doing that all along. But the con is that they don't have the language, that oftentimes there's even greater stigma for them because it's not what's expected, that they're almost locked into that breadwinning, he must earn role. And so I think it's super important that we recognize that men are 40% of caregivers and that it's not the same thing. It's very similar, but there are different expectations around it.
And it really is interesting how we've got so cemented in those expectations, and you just kind of see throughout the world, they're all kind of crumbling right now and really being challenged in all different areas, not just caregiving. Yeah. And it seems like everything is kind of bubbling to a head of, what's good for the goose is good for the gander type thing. And
right, it's all changing.
So, yeah. Can you help our audience in terms of, the caregiver experience and translating that into kind of work skills? What does somebody really need to do that job?
Oh, I love that question. And, I think about this all the time because I'm also hyper aware as a woman of a certain age, that'd be 50, right? The average unpaid family caregiver right now in the United States is a woman in her late 40s, probably has a parent over 65, 2 kids, and she works, right? So, so I fit the profile. I'm also aware of the fact that when a woman over, in her late 40s or early 50s steps out of the workplace, it's often very difficult for her to step back in. So I think it's really important that we think about that. And I've just been talking about statistics, and I forgot your question.
Oh, what I wanted to know was, kind of translating the caregiver experience into kind of work skills.
Yes. And so where I was going, but of course, and I always say when I forget my train of thought, you have to forgive me. I've been a caregiver. I have an excuse, right? But I think, so I'm aware that there's this, risk that we face if our life interferes with our work. And I write about this sometimes because it makes me angry because if you think about those skills that a caregiver has, why wouldn't you hire them? Why wouldn't you just hire all former caregivers? There are the negotiation skills. I mean, we are negotiating all day long. Tell me that you don't have an early morning doctor's appointment, and I will find one, right? I mean, so think about the way that could potentially translate to skills. I mean, to sales skills, right? I can get to yes. When I absolutely need to get to yes, I can get to yes. There's a ton of soft skills. We are often dealing with difficult personalities. I mentioned that my father was what they consider, I guess, to be an aggressive dementia person. Every day that I walked in there, I did not know, and this, I think, is the case for most caregivers of dementia and Alzheimer's, right? We don't know what we're walking into every day. So we're prepared on any given day to meet the person we care for where they are, right? And to deal with difficult personalities. That could be the person we're caring for in the moment. That could be an overworked, professional caregiver that we're dealing with. That could be our siblings who are happy or unhappy with how things are going. I mean, we know how to work with multiple personalities. The ability to juggle and to multitask and to work through a to-do list. When caregivers describe what they do in a day to non-caregivers, nobody believes it. I mean, you go from medical to legal to the soft skills to transportation. It's phenomenal what we can get done in a day because we have to. And then there are the sort of medical-based tasks that we really wish, I think, that the healthcare industry had a better structure around. But we are, cleaning wounds and changing equipment and really tuning into people's needs and feelings. So I think those are all such excellent translatable skills in the workplace.
Oh, I definitely agree. And like you said, sometimes they're looked down upon, and yet talk about the essence of team player, and
right.
and putting that team first, and
building
so
a
many
team, finding your own team, right?
Yeah, and so many people are, asking for that in the business world and going, why can't people self-motivate? Why can't they, self-supervise? Why can't they? And these people are doing
problems.
It constantly. Mm-hmm. And like you said, great multitaskers, negotiators, working under pressure and still pushing forward, with a smile on their face most of the time.
Right.
How can we make giving care to others less disruptive in our lives?
I think first of all we need to accept that to a degree it will be disruptive, right? So my answer to that question would be accepting our role as caregiver is so important. And that might sound small or even strange, but you've probably encountered this. I've encountered this. So many people who are caregivers who don't necessarily identify as caregivers. They think maybe caregivers are only the people whose parents or relatives live with them. They think, well, my parent is in a nursing home, so I'm not actually a caregiver. But I think caregiving is really about the space it takes up in our heads and our hearts, not necessarily where the person we care for lives. So accepting that you are in this role is really important. I mean, the other place acceptance comes into play, it certainly did for me, was I resisted the role for years. As my parents started to need more and more, I'm the youngest in my family. I didn't want it to be me. I didn't think I was the most qualified for the role. And so I put so much energy towards being cranky around having to be the caregiver that if I had just sort of accepted, I do have the skill set, this is happening, imagine the energy I could have directed, in a positive way and less of a toll it would have taken on my own psyche. So I think acceptance is a very important first step.
That's really good, because so many people do push that away. And, it's kind of like, well, if I don't accept it, it's not going to happen, or it's going to stop,
right.
or it's going to slow down. And no, it's not going to do any of that.
It doesn't go away, and nobody gets younger.
Yeah. And the burden gets heavier because there were things you could have dealt with and you didn't, or you didn't deal with them in the way that maybe you should have, would have, or could have, if you would have been accepting. And, I found for myself, and I don't know if you did, but once I got to that level of acceptance, there was a freedom in that, because I didn't have to fix it. I didn't have to make it go away because I couldn't. It wasn't for me to control. And that was like a huge gift. And I'm like, well, why was I pushing that one away for so long? But I never looked at it like that, or no one ever told me it could be like that it would lessen my load and I could be more attentive to the true needs versus I got overwhelmed, and I don't know if you did, but I got overwhelmed with the checklist of things to do, and that ended up being my main focus, and that's where I got almost my energy, was checking those things off on my list instead of my personal relationship. I got sucked into that role for a while. Yeah.
Yep. I think I did. I think I hid behind the checklist. In fact, I remember at its height, it had 136, I used an Excel spreadsheet. It had 136 items on it. And I would wake up and say, I have got to get through as many items on this list today as possible. And relationships were not the most important thing when I was in that mode. And then, ultimately, as your caregiving journey sort of comes to its ultimate conclusion, you realize this would have been so much easier if I had just sort of ceded control, because we really don't have a heck of a lot of it, ultimately, when it comes to illness and aging. And just to be present with the person you're caring for is ultimately all it's about. And you realize that, and you wish you could also translate that to everyday relationships.
Yep. Well, one of the things, we always talk about being person-centered, and that whole person, I don't like that phrase myself, because I think so many people look at their checklist and go, I'm being person-centered because my list is all about them. But what I realized one time after interviewing so many people about, what is their role, I realized, and it just hit me like a dumbbell on the head, because I missed it for a long time. But everybody had kind of this subtle twang in their voice that said, this isn't how I pictured my life. And that subtle twang, that emotion stops us from being able to be person-centered, because inherently we have to take care of ourselves first, and emotionally we're stunted because of that thought and that belief. And so for me, that was like a big awakening when I realized, okay, I have my list, and those things need to get done, but I need to do this different, because I'm not being the daughter that I want to be. I'm like losing that role in this caregiving, the way that I'm doing it. And so I came up with this tool called Your Memory Chip, which has people focus on, are they safe? Are they happy? Are they pain-free? And when I found that I put those three things first before my list, I approached my list totally different. And some of the things I found I didn't have to do. Some of them were just to keep me busy because I needed to feel like I was doing something. Others made me realize that I could have somebody else do it, hire out, or have family where I wasn't willing to let go of control, which I think is a problem for a lot of people too, because we want to make sure it's done right. And that I could just sit next, to my mom and not even say a word, but just appreciate her presence and revel in that, and let our relationship truly exist. And so it was, those checklists. When you said you had your Excel spreadsheet, I was giggling because every night I would print mine out. So I walked around. Literally, I had mine on a clipboard and carried it with me. Because I was working full time. I had, a daughter. I was married. I was full-time real estate agent. I had extra people living in my house. I was taking care of both my parents. I volunteered, and it was just like I couldn't keep it in my head, and so I put it on my list. But it's sad to me now how checking off an item made me more energized than relaxing and enjoying someone's company for a while during my journey. It got really off-skewed for me.
I think that idea of checking off or crossing off the list is, really important to talk about, because, and I see this especially for women, and women who tend to fall into whatever we want to call it, that caregiving role as the daughter. I think part of the reason we got there is because we have been natural achievers our whole life. It's that good girl syndrome, right? We were raised to be good girls, and we were probably good students, and then, we were focused on being good wives and good mothers, and now we're like, dang it, I'm still going to be this good daughter, and I am going to get an A on this assignment. I'm going to do it all right. So we probably, I'm generalizing here, but many of us who assume this caregiving role are probably really, like you said, energized. We get a jolt from getting the gold star, from crossing things off our list, from achieving every day. And it's a real shift, that unfortunately many of us see in hindsight, that, oh, wow, the real value, the real reward is being present with the person that you're caring for and learning to have a relationship with them in the moment, whether, you had a difficult relationship with your mother growing up that, as many women and girls experience, whether you had, a wonderful relationship, regardless of what it is, every day is your starting point. And every day, the most important thing you have to do is just be. And that's not achievement focused. So I think giving up this idea of what the modern woman is supposed to be, right? Firing on all cylinders. It's not easy, but if we can figure it out. It's interesting. I wrote this book, Mogul Mom and Maid. It came out in late 2013. And a lot of what I talked about is, the importance for women, mothers, working mothers, to let go of things like the laundry. I've got a manifesto that came out of the book, and one of my favorite lines on the manifesto is, we've decided the laundry can wait because life won't. But when it came to really stepping into my caregiving role, and it was just a few months after the book was published that both of my parents, they actually happened to both be diagnosed with terminal illnesses on the exact same day, if you can believe that. I went from one hospital where I heard Alzheimer's to another where I heard stage 4 cancer. So it was, I really stepped into a crazy time. But I wasn't able to translate what I had been preaching to working mothers about letting go, forget about perfection, don't worry about things like the laundry, to I didn't translate that as a daughter and a caregiver for a while, right? I was going to do everything on that list right, perfectly. And there is no right or perfect.
Yep. But we live in this world where we're taught that there is, and that we're supposed to achieve that. And so that was another big lesson for me to accept there is no perfection. Perfection happens one time and one time only, and it lasts a few seconds, and it can't be created exactly. You can get close, but, every moment is different. You're different. The person with you is different. The environment's different. I mean, you can go on and on and on and on and on. And when you let go of having to be perfect and realize nobody's perfect, so why do you think you have to be perfect 24/7? And that's, I think, what so many of us take on is not only that we have to be perfect in a moment, but we have to be perfect 24/7. And it's because we love somebody. It's because we care. It's because we want to do good by them. But again, nobody can fulfill that. It's just not a realistic goal. So to be able to say to yourself, I'm gonna be the best I can with the knowledge I have in the moment before me, knowing that I will always have another opportunity to improve. And, maybe if I snap or if I don't get something done in the time that I wanted, it wasn't perfect. And maybe next time I can be better, and I will try to be better. But, that's kind of the roller coaster of life. We have emotions, and, we're not the Stepford wives, and we're not meant to be. We're meant to kind of go on this roller coaster and learn as we go. And I think if people can frame this whole journey as a learning experience instead of a roadblock, instead of an interference or an embarrassment or, a burden or whatever. There's so many terms people use for it, and say, this is something for me to really learn something from. And I think there's so many life lessons wrapped in this journey. Would you agree with that statement, or do you think I'm left field?
No, I think it's why these conversations, like the one that, you provide through your show, are so important, because one of the things I joke about is, listening to you, I blame the media to some degree too. If you do a Google image search for caregiver or adult daughter, an elderly mother, the images that pop up are ridiculous. There's always two smiling women. One's has a few grays in her hair, and one's, a beautiful silver fox. They either are, I found that there are three sort of, I don't know if archetype is the right word. There are two women, and they place their foreheads against each other, and they're gazing lovingly, mother and daughter, into each other's eyes. I don't know about you, but I never touched foreheads with my mother. It just wasn't wasn't a pose. We struck in. The next one is mother and daughter, sometimes mother and father, gazing off into the sunset with this ridiculous, loving look. And the third one is the daughter hugging the parents, but from the back, almost in like a chokehold. I mean, so the imagery that we're served up when we go searching on the web for help and support, or we reach out to a service and we look at their marketing and their brochures, perpetuates this idea that you should be going through this beautifully coiffed, beautifully dressed, happy and at peace all the time. And we know that that is just not the case.
No. And everybody goes down this path different. Everybody's relationships are different to begin with, and they change during the journey. And that's just called life. And so, yeah, there's so many stigmas and set media pushes out there. There's the doom and the gloom, and then there's the light at the end of the tunnel, that some people are never supposed to pass through the doom and the gloom or the scariness of this disease, and it's all there. I don't think I've not met one person who hasn't gone from low to high multiple times on this journey. It's very emotional.
There's research that I find really interesting that comes actually out of Johns Hopkins, and maybe you've talked about it before, this idea of the caregiver gain, but research that shows that there's actually, physical and emotional gain that we get through caregiving, better cognitive skills, better physical strength, higher self-esteem, more connectedness, even, longer lifespans. And part of the research shows that this caregiver gain exists even at the same time that, there are moments where we feel like caregiving is breaking us. And I certainly, had my moments where my knees practically buckled under me. I don't mean to say that it's all happy and wonderful, but that's what I find really great about this research that I've looked at, is that two things can be true at once. Caregiving can be harder than anything. And there can be moments where you feel felt, right? You are not taking care of yourself. You're overwhelmed. These things are all true and do happen. And at the same time, it can be building you, improving you, and, providing benefit. And so I think it's important that we talk about it as, two things true at once. It's not, like you said, all gloom and doom, and it's not all, loving gazes out to nowhere. I think the other important thing that you talked about, too, is back to acceptance and what you referenced people saying to you, and I hear this all the time as well, which is, this is not what my life is supposed to be like. And again, the sooner we can accept this is my life, just, switch to that statement. And I hear this especially with women around career. We have goals. We were taught to lean in and to head to the corner office, and that might not happen because life happens. And so the sooner we can accept not that my life is going to start sooner or this isn't supposed to be my life, but really, use language around the idea that, okay, this is my life. So what, now what? This exists, therefore this will happen. And so maybe I won't go to the corner office, but I'm still going to develop mad skills. I'm still going to develop incredible experiences and relationships. I'm still doing important work.
Yeah, and that's very that's great advice. Because I do think everybody states that, and I don't care if it's dementia, if it's illness, if it's a death. I mean, there can be so many things where people just never imagined their life like that, and but I mean, if we look back at most of our life, we would be shocked at where we are and what we've gone through. So when it happens in the moment and as we're moving forward, I think when it's difficult, people hold on to that so much more. But then, it's that looking back period, where you have come to accept it, where you're able to see some of the grace, through it and some of the lessons learned. I think some of the most beautiful lessons for me, when I really felt pressed against the wall and just screamed out at God sometimes, I can't take any more, leave me alone, throw me a bone. This has to end, because usually it's not just that one area that you're dealing with. Our lives are very complicated and they're multifaceted, and something would always happen, and I started asking, just what's the lesson? Just teach me the lesson so I don't have to go through this again. What is the lesson? And there was always a lesson, but I couldn't find that lesson if I wasn't open to looking for it. And so that was just that was one of my big, huge breakthroughs on this journey. What do you think some of the biggest challenges are for Alzheimer's and dementia caregivers who do work outside the home? Do you have like a list of 5 or?
I actually don't. But off the top of my head, I would say the unpredictability, if that's a word, right? Yeah, the unpredictability of it is one of the most difficult. It is hard to plan. For the last 3 years, after my mom passed, and even though my dad was doing well for a while, I slept literally with my cell phone under my pillow. I mean, that's just a strange way to live, when you think about it. But it's what I wanted to do, to be available for any late night, midnight call. And inevitably, that's a slight exaggeration. I would say, though, at least 50% of the times I was booked on a plane, to take a plane somewhere the next day. Those plans were impacted. I ended up in the ER for taking my father to the doctor. And so it's just constant choice. You're constantly deciding here or there, what's the most important thing, what's going to matter the most in the moment, what am I going to look back at and decide was the right decision. So I think that's the number one thing, the unpredictability. And so when those trips, for example, are, for work, you're constantly deciding, do I go do the right thing for the career? Do I do the right thing for my parent? How will this matter in, 10 minutes, 10 years, that sort of thing. And they're not simple decisions. It's not as simple as, my father is more important than my job, because we need to eat, right? We need to keep our jobs. And I was always thinking about this when I was going through my most intense caregiving moments, and I always, try to give women permission, and men, to think about this. But caregiving eventually ends, even though some of us feel like it'll never end, right? But it eventually ends. And I think it's perfectly okay to be thinking about, what is it I want my life to look like when this is over? And therefore, how do I make choices based on that? So, when both of my parents were diagnosed at the same time, I couldn't make it to my kids' soccer games. You can only be in so many places at once. And that's okay. I have plenty of opportunities to be a good mother that don't involve, standing on the sidelines. So I made a choice in the moment to be less present, on the weekends and during their activities. And I made different decisions around work, because I needed to make sure that paycheck didn't go away.
Yeah. Well, and that's a really spooky thing in this day and age too, that balancing that paycheck, and people have such great fear of losing their jobs, and being called out, even when there's a work shortage. I mean, it still hangs over people, I think, tremendously. I wanted to also make a comment about the gift of, life being really unexpected and unpredictable. And on the flip side of that, for me, I found the gift of being spontaneous. I ended up being more flexible in all of my life, and then got to experience things that maybe I wouldn't have before, that I would have poo-pooed. And so that was a big gift in terms of the journey of that unpredictability of, there's more than one way to slice a cat, and get the job done. And then, oh gosh, I can't read my writing here. Well, surprise, surprise, surprise. Um,
But that
what
all
do
goes
I
back to
want?
acceptance, doesn't it?
I know it. I know it. Oh,
Yeah.
what do I want my life to look like?
Mm.
Again, it's just such an interesting factor because we all do projections of how we think things are going to pan out, and we all go through crises on different levels, and it's going to happen, and we're going to feel out of control, and that's normal, to feel that way for a while. I mean, if you're feeling that way for too long of a time, you might want to seek some help. But that's just life. It's kind of a roller coaster there. When you think about balancing, caring and a career, do you have any tips for people there, in addition to what we've already discussed?
Yeah, I think, again, a lot of this comes down to your attitude towards the situation. And I don't mean to overuse the word, but again, accepting where you are. At certain times in caregiving, it's not going to be the right time to go all in or to take a certain assignment. And that doesn't always feel fair, right? Life isn't fair. I done all of the work. I'm ready to take on the next challenge, assignment, responsibility at work. And now, given what's happening in my life, I can't. But to remember the long game, that, assuming that you are operating under that mode of, okay, I know, I have an idea of where I want to be and what remnants of my old life I want to maintain for when this journey is over. As long as you're sort of moving in that direction, then there's so much potential post-caregiving, as long as you realize that it's not necessarily going to look the same or it's not going to look like you wanted it to. And an example of that is how many people I meet who have become entrepreneurs post-caregiving. And, I mean, this is an industry that is so ripe for disruption because we know, the systems aren't in place, the policies aren't in place. There's so much to improve around the caregiver experience in this country. And so you see people coming through their caregiving experience, starting businesses, starting services, starting media entities like you have. There's so much potential. Again, it's not necessarily what we thought our career would look like, when we were back in college or high school, but the good and the bad news, right, especially is that we're living longer, and that's longer retirement we need to save for, so we're working longer, which means we can start careers and new endeavors and become entrepreneurial at any point in our life. So I think that's a hopeful message.
Yeah, oh, definitely, definitely. And, the other thing I found was just the people that I was lucky enough to meet through this process, too, that I wouldn't have met. For me, I've been able to connect with people all over the world, and you don't have to do what I do to do that. Through social media, it's amazing the friendships that you can make, the information that you can gain and share through something that's free, to all of us, and I think that that's a wonderful thing to be able to look at. Anything that we haven't discussed that you'd like to share with our audience, Liz?
The only other thing I would add is the importance, and we've touched on this theme to some degree, but the importance of the stories we tell ourselves too, right? Back to me being the youngest daughter and why me? How come I'm caregiving? When I stopped sort of singing or telling myself that, victim's tune of woe is me, it's all on my shoulders, and changed my story to, wow, I'm lucky that I do have the organizational skills, the compassion, and believe it or not, the capacity, although, in advance of caregiving, I never would have said I had the capacity, but clearly I did because I was getting it done and I was doing a pretty good job. When I instead started to tell myself, wake up every morning and practice gratitude and write a different story about myself, which was, wow, I'm strong, I've got what it takes, not always pretty, but I truly could become thankful for the skills I had, the experience I had, the opportunity I had. And that, again, was a real game changer from the mornings I woke up and went, this isn't fair, woe is me. Words are really powerful, and we all, whether we're conscious of it or not, write a story about our lives every day. So, I would just encourage caregivers to recognize what that story is, whether it's around their career, whether it's around the relationships, whether it's around that checklist, as we talked about, and see if there's a different version of the story that's going to be more powerful.
Well, and I'll just add a personal story on this one. I remember when my dad had died from brain cancer, and we got together. I have an older brother and a younger brother, and I was sharing stories about mom and dad, with them. And because I said, I'm going to write a book, and I still haven't, but I was, pulling these stories together. And I remember them looking at me just kind of in this really almost dismayed look, and one of them actually said to me, where did you get these stories? And I remember just feeling so sad for them. And I just responded, I was there.
Yeah.
And they didn't have those stories. They didn't have that depth of relationship, and like you said, the opportunity to reframe it in a different light. And I to this day, I feel so bad for both my brothers because they didn't take the opportunity before them to truly be a major part of the caring role with either of my folks. And I just think that that's so sad. And I know that they struggle with that, but I also know as a sister that I couldn't fix that. I couldn't change that. That was one of the lessons too that I learned to let go of, that I couldn't control, and I had to accept it, which then again gave me more time with my folks instead of trying to put my energy where it really wasn't wanted or in their eyes needed, and I had to focus on really what do I want my life to look like and what do I want to remember, what's important to me and with my relationship with my folks. And so that was interesting too. But so many life lessons in this journey.
If I could just add to that super quickly, I think the other thing, I love that you just shared that, and I can relate. And I think the other thing to add to that is, especially as Alzheimer's caregivers, the relationship changes. The person we care for changes, and we mourn and grieve throughout the whole process, right? Because every time there's a shift, we're mourning the loss of who our parent was yesterday, a week ago. But if we can also recognize that there's an opportunity to build a new relationship with, meet that parent where they are, then that too, for those of us who show up every day, that's a huge gift too. It doesn't always feel easy, but you look back and you reflect, and I'm so grateful for the relationship I had with my father, even when he thought I was his sister. For the last few weeks he thought I was his favorite sister. But, hey, he picked the favorite sister, so, I feel good.
Yep, and that's, there's beauty in that, because it you might not be to them who you are, but you're still someone who they love and cherish. And that's really what matters, because we're all so much more than a name, but we get wrapped up sometimes in having to be correct. And, when I see people struggling with that, I always ask them the question, would you argue with a young child if they didn't know your name? They call us all kinds of goofy stuff because they can't pronounce our names. And we're accepting of that. Why is it towards the end of life, or if there's a change, we're not gracious when someone loses a skill as we are when someone's in the learning stages. So, well, this has just been a really fun and interesting conversation, and I think I'm sure our listeners will really appreciate all the tidbits that you shared with us through this journey. What is the best way for people to get a hold of you, Liz?
WorkingDaughter.com is the best place to start. And from there, Liz at WorkingDaughter.com is the email, or you can find Rent a Sister, which is the service I provide to caregivers in the greater Boston area. So I'd say WorkingDaughter.com is a great start.
Okay. Well, wonderful. Well, again, thank you so much for your time. And if people are interested in your book, Mogul, Mom, and Maid, The Balancing Act of the Modern Woman, do they get that through your website, or is that on Amazon? Or
Amazon. Yep.
Okay.
Amazon.
Wonderful. Well, again, thank you, and I wish you the best of luck. You're doing great work. And do you want to mention, I know you had talked when we were talking offline, you had mentioned you were doing a series coming up for caregivers. Do you want to give that a plug?
Oh, sure. If you're in the greater Boston area, I'm starting a workshop series for caregivers in November, which is National Family Caregiver Month, at the Dedham Public Library. And we'll look at a lot of the themes that we talked about today, right? How to accept, how to prepare at work. So love to see people there.
Okay.
Thank you.
Well, great. Thank you, Liz. And again, I just want to remind people, if you are interested in going on our dementia-friendly cruise and symposium, you need to get a hold of Kathy Schoaf quickly to get your cabin booked. We leave November 11th, and we'll be coming back on the 18th. It's just going to be a lot of fun. You can go to alzheimerspeaks.com, and you'll find information right on the home page for that. I also want to just remind people, too, here at Alzheimer Speaks, we've been doing this show for over 6 years. You can go back and listen to them all anytime that you would like. So please feel free to do that. I also do some interviews called Dementia Chats, which is a video interview. And our last one we did was a really interesting conversation. And it was all about, do dementia experts and care partners really know what the person with dementia wants? And our experts on Dementia Chats are all diagnosed and living with the disease. So it's a very insightful video, and it's free. And there's many others out there too that you can go ahead and download or watch or share. So please feel free to do that. I too will be traveling. I'm going to be in Connecticut and Massachusetts next week with Atria. And so if you are in I'll be out in Falmouth, and I will be in Andover and Stratford, and where else am I going to be? Waterford. Please let me know. I'd love to be able to meet you. Some of these are open to the public. Some are just for professionals that we are doing. But I will be out there the 23rd through, or actually I'll be speaking the 24th through the 26th. So feel free to check that out through Atria. Again, thank you all so much for your time. Have a blessed week, and we'll talk with you soon. Bye now.
Hi, everyone. This is Meredith from the Senior Fitness with Meredith podcast, where I discuss all things for seniors, from fitness, your health and wellness journeys, how to be all over strong and beyond. I also have my mini podcast called Motivation with Meredith. It's a great, quick motivational pick-me-up for your days. Join me, listen now, search for Senior Fitness with Meredith on your favorite podcast platform.